Today we start our podcast about art covers on music media. Today's episode is about how it all started, both with the collection of my father, the artist Rudi Fischer, and the initial story of the art cover. Dad, over the last few decades, you have acquired an extensive collection of music media with art covers. I visited the exhibition Broken Record Number 2 together with the curator of the museum Hamburger Bahnhof in Berlin. There are approximately 700 music media, and the show required all of the Riekhallen as an exhibition space. Only then did I realize how much exhibition space is needed to present such a huge collection. How did this all start?
Well, in 1974, as a teenager, I bought this record here um, in a flea market in Stuttgart. And it's the 7-inch record Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet from 1959. I liked the song. It sounded particularly playful to my ears. And I became interested in the cover because it appealed to me when I bought it, and I found out that it was one by Neil Fujita. His style reminded me a bit of Kandinsky, whom we were talking about in school at that time. So Fujita, the son of Japanese immigrants born in Hawaii in the USA, was hired by the legendary cover designer Alex Steinweiss in 1954 and later became a director at Columbia Records. Fujita was the first to commission painters, photographers and illustrators to create covers for Columbia albums. During his time at Columbia, Fujita designed nearly 50 album covers, including numerous iconic jazz covers. From the era of Dave Brubeck here, or Miles Davis, the Jazz Messengers, Charles Mingus, among others. Fujita used his own colorful abstract paintings on the covers of Brubeck's Time Out, Gigi Gry's Modern Jazz Perspective, or Charles Mingus' album. This record here, the Dave Brubeck Quartet from 1959, had disregarded all the conventions of the record buses. On the Time Out LP, every piece of jazz had a different beat. Take 5 had a 5/4 beat, very unusual at the time, and as the name said, 5/4. And despite the predictions of doom from the record industry salespeople, it was still a great success. One of the few jazz pieces that moved into the charts. A perfect example that you should assert yourself against the mainstreams more often. Dave Brubeck wanted a painting on the cover and pushed for advice from the entertainment industry about this. As usual, these record bosses wanted to show the musicians photos, very boring, and were against abstract art. And today, this single is part of my extensive collection of record covers designed by artists. Another reason is in the play with the number 5 in the lyrics and the beat. Over the years, I have developed a passion for the number 5. The mathematical, creative, and cultural peculiarities bear witness to a special magic that still fascinates me today and always brings me new discoveries every day. In the piece, it sounds so natural and playfully simple, just take 5. It sparked a lifelong preoccupation with it for me. I later bought the accompanying album Time Out by Dave Brubeck. As you can see here, it's a special edition. And then I was also interested in the background of the recordings. Before the recordings were made, Brubeck and his band traveled through Turkey, Poland, East Berlin, Iran, and India as a cultural ambassador on behalf of the US President Eisenhower at that time. The State Department had discovered jazz potential as a Cold War weapon to win the hearts and minds of the world. Improvisation structured around within the set of mutually agreed upon boundaries, the music of jazz was, in the eyes of the US State Department, a perfect metaphor for America. Here was the music that underlaid democracy and freedom. However, it also seemed somewhat paradoxical for black and white musicians to travel the world and pretend a racial harmony that did not exist in the United States at that time, and maybe not today.
So, was it curiosity that motivated you to start collecting?
Yes, on the one hand, curiosity, but also the ongoing passion for art and music. I mean, the curiosity about covers designed by artists has opened up a realm of music that was previously unknown to me and that I would hardly have bothered with otherwise. Conversely, through my involvement with music, I got to know a number of artists who either designed covers or interested me through their inspiration through music. This crossover of art and music is still effective today.
Can you give me an example?
So Neil Fajita made the cover for here for Dave Brubeck Time Out album. And when I discovered another cover of made from him in the Lerche, that's the name of a bird in and record store in Stuttgart at that time, it was about Charles Mingus, one of the most important jazz bassists and composers. And his legendary album, Mingus, which I can present here, is from 1959. This album includes musical tributes to tenor saxophonists like Lester Young and the composer and saxophonist Charlie Bird Parker and the jazz pianist, composer and bandleader Duke Ellington, but also showed the social criticism that was typical for Mingus. For example, in the piece Fables of Forbes, he musically makes fun of the racist Governor Forbes of Little Rock in Arkansas. Despite new civil rights for racially integrated schools, he denied 9 black students access to high school. And in the end, President Eisenhower had to send in the National Guards to allow students access to and to prevail against the radical segregationists. That means I got to know many of the most important jazz musicians through Neil Fajita's 2 iconic covers, for example. And I have the album here that was released for the first time as a double album for the 16th anniversary. And my favorite song is still Goodbye Pork Pie Head, which Mingus dedicated in 1959 in response to the news of Lester Young's death, because he always wore this hat, well known from the comedian Buster Keaton, and Lester Young's saxophone style still gets me under my skin. And because of Charlie Parker, Mom had to take me to the Birdland Jazz Club, named after him in New York, and we took a photo outside there. And we will talk about Charlie Parker among cover pioneers in episode 3, as the artist David Stone Martin designed a groundbreaking album for him. And so, out of curiosity, you move from one discovery to another. And let me take another example, like this album here. And it's Reeds and Percussion from Enoch Light from 1961. And here's another nice example from Fajita of Enoch Light's jazz big band experiment, who has produced completely new innovative stereo sounds with his work for the Command label. We will meet this label again in a later podcast episode about the well-known German artist Joseph Albers, and who was a role model for many American artists that you probably know nowadays.
You mentioned Alex Steinweiss. He is considered the father of art record cover design, right?
Yes, that's right. The American graphic designer was the first art director for Columbia Records back in 1939, where he introduced the concept album covers and cover art on the large scale. Since records at the time were mostly sold in uniform brown or gray sleeves, very boring, he brought an artistic point of view to the practice and is now widely regarded as the inventor of the modern record cover designs. He then worked in record cover design from 1939 to 1973 and designed around 2,500 covers. This means one cover every 4 days within 34 years. I mean, that's productive. This gives you a very good overview. I have a book about it, which you can see here. It covers not all of the 2,500 records, but gives you a very good overview about it, and it's very interesting.
And how did the first kind of cover design come about?
Well, in 1939, this 23-year-old Alex Steinweiss was working at Columbia Records when inspiration struck him. He was able to convince the skeptical management to use colorful, graphically designed covers instead of the boring, plain brown paper or cardboard covers that had been common until then. And for the first illustrated box set, Smash Song Hits by Rodgers and Hart, he quickly grabbed a photographer in 1940, and the two headed to New York's West 45th Street and posed in front of the city's most famous Imperial Theater on Broadway. When they looked at the striking canopy of the building, they both agreed it was the perfect for their project. And this cover here is album Smash Songs by Rodgers and Hart. That was the experiment. Steinweiss convinced the owner of the Imperial Theater to briefly change the signage of the canopy. When the evening came, they exchanged the letters and turned on the lighting. And Smash Songs Hits by Rodgers and Hart was set proudly on the screen. And Rodgers and Hart was one of the most successful songwriting duos back at that time on Broadway. The photographer took a photo of the theater awning and captured a piece of history. The contrast of the image of Steinweiss is strong and thus clearly sets the front apart from the otherwise dark cover area. Stone white shows the awning diagonally from the bottom right. The underside of the awning is brightly lit and floats like a set piece in front of the dark cover background, whose red concernic circles indicate the shape of the records inside. And this image was presumably intended to become the world's first ever album cover. Sales of this and subsequent Columbia records skyrocketed to unimagined heights. They say it was 7 to 8 folding in the sales.
Probably the first illustrated album cover?
Well, in 1939 is considered to be the general beginning of individual cover design. Decca Records released a record with French folk songs in a red, white and blue checkerboard pattern. And Victor had already released this Romeo and Juliet album, as you can see here. And it was a 3-piece shellac album with a cover design by Frank Decca in August 1937. I mean, so this cover was released 2.5 years earlier before Steinweiss' first album cover. And the cover is created here in a direct reference to classical music and the company's image, which requires classic image motifs. From a historical academic stance, Victor primarily cites antique historical motifs such as landscape portrayals or architectural elements, antique statues and draped textiles. But the pseudo-cubist still lifes and pseudo-surreal motifs are also used on the Victor covers to evoke cliched atmospheres. This is purposely intended to convey the feeling of stability value. And Frank Decca works for Victor are characterized above all these traditional tastes in art, which has a great influence on his work. I have another nice example from Frank Decca. Let me present this one here. There you can see it's a very typical album with the Symphony No. 7, which is shown here.
Frank Decca sounds pretty German based on the name, right?
Oh yes, his family, like Steinweiss, comes from Germany. His grandfather worked as a woodcarver in Philadelphia. Decca loved the artists Degas and Picasso, French ones, not German ones, as shown in the example, like here with the harlequin, and looked very Picasso-like. In this work, he also borrows from Cubism And all in all, Decca remains true to his traditional approach to images, even when he incorporates expressionist, surrealistic, or abstract elements. Especially when compared to Steinweiss, it becomes clear that Decca loves the image rather than the design. And what I also think is worth mentioning about Frank Decca, and I also think of a comparison with the artist and graphic designer German Anton Stankowski that we both appreciate. He not only works as a freelance designer and advertising graphic artist, but also designed the logos for Wrigley Spearmint chewing gum, the Chesterfield and L&M cigarettes, the oil company Texaco, and the Carlsberg beer. And let me say, at this, and like Anton Stankowski, he was not only an artist, but also invented the logos of Deutsche Bank, Commerzbank, and Fissmann, and many others. So a lot of similarities between these both.
Is Alex Steinweiss overrated then?
No. No one other than Steinweiss, with his more than 2,000 works between 1940 and 1973, aroused such a widespread interest in album covers. In the 1940s, Steinweiss' works dominated the music world. Vinyl records, usually sold in electronic stores, had become desirable items that could stimulate the imagination, and the wallets of course, of music lovers around the world. He knew how to make the best possible use of the limited picture frame, his reduced formal language, his strong image in the center, his eye-catching typography, and his contrasting colors became his personal successful style. He learned to use the spray gun, which became an important tool for him at the time. With the split-second eye appeal, he avoided decorative accessories and reduced his covers to the essentials. I picked out a few sample covers, and in addition, the playback formats were facing a change at the end of the 1940s. The shellac records, invented in 1900, played at 78 revolutions per minute, and because of their wide grooves, could only accommodate about 3 to 5 minutes of music on each side. And when Columbia Records bought the 33 1/3 RPM long-playing record made of the non-breakable vinyl onto the market in 1947, it was again Alex Steinweiss who invented and patented a new packaging sleeves, which is still used today. It became the norm of the record industry. The new format now allows up to 25 minutes, so 5 to 8-fold of the playing time on each page. In 1949, Victor releases the 45 RPM micro groove record, now known as the 7-inch. This was preferred for shorter single recordings, and initially all three formats were used in parallel until the shellac records were discontinued 10 years later in 1957. And since 4-color printing was still in its infancy at the time, Steinweiss was essentially forced to use bright 3 or 4 solid colors. He benefited from the fact that he dealt intensively with European poster art during his apprenticeship. In many ways, he was greatly influenced the way music is visualized and presented today. His bold graphics revolutionized the music industry at the time.
But in principle, he was interested in promoting sales through more interesting packaging.
Sure.
So it's marketing, right?
Sure, of course. I mean, the record packaging should reflect the music and appeal to the potential customers and encourage them to buy. The company gave Steinweiss a chance with these synesthetic covers, and that tell the story of a sound through images, and within a few months sales they increased by 700% to 800%. And although he is not the first graphic designer in this young branch of record cover design, he brings a totally new design approach onto play and incorporates the cover design into the company style as a corporate identity, and that at that time, I mean, making him the best known cover designer of the 1940s. His covers were influenced by poster art in Europe, and you quickly recognized what it was about. Simple expression and what kind of music it was.
Which examples of his covers are important for you?
I mean, the presentation of the hand or hands is a frequent motive, which he shows either making music or symbolically as an eye catcher. I have a perfect example here, the cover album Boogie Woogie from 1941. Here he shows the isolated musician's hands playing here and in black and white, and greatly reduced musical instruments, which is shown here in yellow. And these names of the most renowned jazz pioneers of the time, such as Count Basie, Mead Lux Lewis, or Albert Ammons, they dance above the hands here and in the colors of the piano. The pianist's lit cigarette appears in the ashtray here and on the grand piano. I mean, even the smallest detail is not a decorative addition or accessory, but rather has an essential relationship to the music being played. It shows that popular jazz music is played in smoky sheds and bars at the time. We will also see this motif of stylized hands in the artists David Stone Martin and Andy Warhol in a later podcast episode. By the way, the tenor saxophonist Lester Young plays on the piece Boogie Woogie by Count Basie. You will come across the names when we will talk about other art covers. Sometimes his work could be highly symbolic or conceptual, such as his striking illustration for Paul Robeson's Songs of Free Men. I mean, this is a perfect example for his conceptual style and illustration. I mean, sometimes his work is so highly received. Let's see in this cover, Songs of Free Men, he shows that this hand is coming here from as a symbol in itself. The cover is particularly highlighted because of its formal strictness and emotional power. Here Steinway shows this hand pushing from the right into the center of the picture, and which is touching a white dagger and has broken free binding chains. The handcuff still encloses the arm joint. In terms of style, here Steinway clearly borrows from the contemporary war posters, which he also designed himself during his military service for the US Army. A black worm here with a red swastika symbol is impaled with the dagger, which stands out glistening white against this foggy gray airbrushed background. A red puddle also already formed around him, and the information text on the cover is in simple dark type at the top left and bottom left in the image. The title of the album can be read in red bar rising from the left to the right in stenciled letters, repeating the color of the pool of blood. And the dominant types of the title run across the cover towards the dagger, which is overlaid by the title and its foil. I mean, the red bar looks like an official stamp. In literature, the dagger is used by Steinway here and is described as an echo of freedom and heroism.
Paul Robeson hasn't told me anything yet. Do you have to know him?
Oh my God, of course, yes, absolutely. I mean, not only was he the world's famous singer and actor in the 1940s, he was the best paid artist all over the world. And his appearance and his demeanor radiated immense appeal to the general public. I mean, when Paul Robeson came in, people were just adored. They adored him. Paul Robeson sings on the album, and I will also talk about him in connection with Pablo Picasso in the next podcast episode number 2. And on this album, the black civil rights activist and baritone sings the American Union anthem. he sings Joe Hill alongside with Russian worker songs in Russian, a Spanish Civil War anthem in Spanish against the fascism, and the famous song Die Moorsoldaten in German, which was written in the Bergamo concentration camp. Mainly political opponents of the Nazi regime were held prisoner in this camp. They had to cultivate the moor there with simple tools such as spades, and one night in 1933 in the Bergamo concentration camp near Papenburg, which is in, you don't have to know it, in Lower Saxony, today known for the shipyard of the large cruise ships. The prisoners were inhumanly beaten by the SS guards. And after this night of the long sleds, the inmates came up with a plan to do something for their own honor. They want to put on a theater performance on a Sunday, the Concentrazione Circus, to show the tormentors that the prisoners have not lost the will to live. The song Die Moorsoldaten was secretly created for this event, a song that has great symbolic power for the person's freedom, and he is locked away in a labor camp in a dictatorship for political, dissident, religious or other reasons, and has to fear for his life.
I immediately thought of the almost comparable situation in today's Russia and its gulags, like Alexei Navalny experienced it in his oppression leading up to his recent death.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very sadly so. I mean, the song Joe Hill became known through Pete Seeger, a name we will meet in episode 3, and Joan Baez, who performed the song at the legendary Woodstock Festival in the late 60s. Joe Hill is about one of the biggest judicial scandals in the USA, I mean before Trump. In 1940, the undesirable migrant worker, songwriter and union activist was sentenced to death in Utah for lack of evidence. He campaigned for freedom of expression and freedom of assembly for minors. So there's a pretty historic selection of songs on this album.
The next cover reminds me of something.
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, this is the album Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 5 from 1941. Yes, that's how I felt too. Steinway's cover for Beethoven's concerto, a beam of white light here coming and from the right side and splitting into a prism over this piano, obviously influenced the iconographic cover of Hypnosis, 1973 Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon cover. White light can be broken down into its spectral colors using a prism. Let me show this here. I have this cover from the 50th anniversary, and it's very similar, as you can see, how the white light can be broken down into spectral colors. The rainbow colors red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo and violet are usually referred to as spectral colors. So to say, the depiction of Josef Fraunhofer's invention back in 1840. And I recently bought it again in this 15th anniversary edition. The timeless songs about greed, power and transience always resonate with me. The art directors of the record companies at the time determined the cover design and signed their works. The artist had little influence on the appearance of the recording packaging. According to Alex Steinway, Andrei Kostelanetz was the exception. He had to sit down with him for each design and discuss the design and take his ideas he wishes to account. Let me show this on a perfect example that I have here. It's about George Gershwin, and from 1944. It shows the portrayal of the city on his American covers of the 1940s, and is mostly to be understood as a homage to New York City. The focus is on the depiction of the basic metropolitan character. This image results from the fact that New York was the center of the music industry at the time, and many districts were directly related to certain musical style. I mean, Broadway means musicals and theater. Harlem was well known for jazz, etc. And the city is often represented in the form of a skyline, which itself becomes a symbol of the city. The representation of individual metropolitan elements, such as neon signs, also suggests an urban context and implies complex connections with simple image formulas. I mean, neon signs like theater performance and music performance, Broadway, the glamour, New York, the hustle and bustle of the city, and the cultural exchange and inspiration and music production and so forth. For Gershwin, Steinway chooses 3 high-rise buildings here and as the central theme. Set slightly below the center of the picture, 2 red buildings here with a black one in the middle rise above an implied street scene from which they are separated by a wooden fence. And Steinway uses this fence as a foil for the album information. In this example of a city view, Steinway structures the building fronts more clearly and in more detail, partly illuminated in yellow, and blue windows structured the buildings, as do fire escapes and clotheslines that he added here, which hung with white laundries that enchant the busy interior of the houses. A monumental sign with the inscription Gershwin above the towers over all 3 buildings, which were immediately catch the eye in heavy black type with a white background and forms the end towards the upper edge of the picture. The lower edge of the image is again reserved for the reduced album information. Steinway places a dark, spatially receding film behind it. On this foil and in front of the wooden fence here, in the middle ground, Steinway places here a dealer with a market cart, which makes the foil recognizable as a path. In this example of a city view by Steinway, this traveling dealer, as well as the laundry hanging in front of the buildings, like in Italy, shows the clearest connection today to the residents of the scene depicted. Even though in this case it emits the silhouette of a skyline, it still creates an image of an urban hustle and bustle.
When you look at the next cover, you immediately understand 3 pieces of music, 3 colors, 3 pigeons.
Ah, yes, exactly. I mean, Steinway got to the heart of the matter with this cover design. That's what I meant earlier with a split-second eye appeal. He avoided decorative accessories and reduced his covers to the essentials. In this example, I like it how the 3 primary colors here are still so bright and blend into each other thanks to the full-tone printing process. 3 carrier pigeons here bring the notes to the musical sections of Stravinsky's symphony.
But you also mentioned that a lot of music history can be read from the covers. Is that already the case with Alex Steinway?
Sure, of course. Steinway designed some of the earliest covers in 1940 for the record producer George Avakian's Hot Jazz series with classics of the genre. Let me show this here. What began unpretentiously with an image of the artist here against striped background. It has white stripes on a yellowish background. It quickly developed into a showcase project for Steinway. Louis Armstrong's ability to be just a great soloist in a dance orchestra or jazz band led jazz into a new era from 1927 onwards. The rise of the soloists began now. Before that, it was all orchestras. Armstrong was a singer, a trumpeter, an entertainer, and he brought jazz, brass jazz to its peak and influenced very important innovation in jazz up to the 1940s and up to the bebop. I mean, decades. And the blue crown here on his head is no coincidence. He was the king of jazz. Born in New Orleans, he moved to Chicago in 1922 and later to New York. I was a little bit disappointed when I recently was at the Louis Armstrong exhibition, which was called I've Seen the Wall, at the Minsk Museum in Potsdam, Germany, which is some kilometers outside of Berlin. They highlighted Armstrong's 1965 concert tour through cities in the former GDR and addressed systems of oppression and racism. And we definitely have to talk about this exhibition separately, as a lot of things were neglected here, and this exceptional musician and his role against racism were not done appropriately, in my opinion. Armstrong is portrayed as a very soft and submissive on the racial issue. For example, next year marks the 16th anniversary of Martin Luther King's bloodshed march in Selma, Alabama. Armstrong replied to a journalist at that time, "They would have even beat Jesus if he were black and marching." I think we should do a podcast episode on the jazz milestones and art covers at a later date. And let me add this. I think almost all of the important development steps in jazz and album covers can be documented with art cover albums.
Oh yes, I would be interested in that. But first we need to cover a few basic topics in the coming episodes, right?
That's correct.
You said that your passion for your music and art plays a crucial role. Why this fascination, or where does it come from?
If we manage to transfer some of the fascination to the listeners in our joint podcast, that would not only be the best indicator of success, but also explains my motivation. Art and music opens horizons. For example, in the second episode about Pablo Picasso and Paul Robeson, we will get to know what artists can do for the people. Be it Picasso with the peace movement or Paul Robeson in his constant appeal to the similarities of different peoples or building bridges between people on different continents. Without dealing with the art covers and the events behind them, I would hardly have been able to have such diverse and rich experiences. You can see many parallels of our present and learn from them.
I can fully understand that now. Just think of the white supremacy and Black Lives Matter incidents in the USA today. One gets the impression that a lot of things are repeated. Now for a completely different topic. How do you play the different record formats?
It was pretty complicated at the beginning. For RCA and Columbia, you needed two different turntables. And not everyone could afford that in the late 1940s after the war. In addition, the record cost $4 for about 5 minutes of playing time. To get an album with a playing time of 20 to 25 minutes, you had to pay $8 to $10. Based on today's purchasing power, that's an equivalent of $60.
Not bad. Can you explain why an LP was called an album?
They are called albums because these recordings are on 78 revolutions per minute shellac records. Each side only holding around 4 to 5 minutes of sound recordings. And if you want to record longer pieces of music, for example, interpretations of classical music or jazz improvisations on a recording medium, you have to record several, usually 3 to 5 records. These records, which together comprise a work, are collected in a stronger cardboard packaging, which has several pages like a book, i.e. in this case includes several connected sleeves and thus results in an album. And let me show it to you with this example. Here you have the record and inside are the shellacs, number 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes up to 5. And it looked like a photo album where you can flip through, and so to speak. The breakthrough of music albums is closely linked to the flourishing of the American economy from 1938 onwards. Nowadays, several pieces of music on a 33 and a third LP or a CD are still referred to as an album, but I doubt that many people know what the term album means.
I didn't know that either. What can listeners expect in the next 4 podcast episodes?
So today we told the story of how it all began. In episode 2, we will talk about Pablo Picasso's covers, which dealt with the theme of war and peace that started back in 1949, actually, and set new standards for me. And in episode 3, we talk about the pioneers of cover design who followed to Frank Decker and Alex Steinweiss, such as the artists David Stone Martin, Ben Shawn, and James Flora. Episode 4 will then deal with Andy Warhol, whose first covers were created in 1949 and also represent important milestones in cover development today. Episode 5 could then deal with the history of jazz and art covers, with German immigrants after the First World War also playing an interesting role in the founding area of Blue Note. Today we already had Louis Armstrong, an enormously important figure in the history of jazz. An alternative would perhaps be a series with artists who represent an interesting crossover of music and album art covers, and who can currently be seen in exhibitions in Germany, such as Doug Atkin or Caspar David Friedrich or Meredith Monk or a few others. We are very flexible. Let's see where our journey will take us. Maybe listeners will vote in the comments, or we will react to current events. Let's see.